So if I told you that doing absolutely nothing over the last 12 months just secretly earned you like $50,000 toward a new house,
Oh, man.
you would probably call me crazy or, ask what kind of scam I was running.
Right. I'd definitely be checking my wallet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because usually when you're trying to make a massive life decision, like buying a home, there's this expectation of a clear, undeniable signal, like a traffic light at a busy intersection.
Yeah, I want that green light.
Right. You save up your down payment, you get your pre-approval, the light turns green, and you just hit the gas.
We all crave that binary clarity. I mean, especially when hundreds of thousands of dollars are on the line. Red means stop. Green means go. 30-year commitment.
But then you actually step into the housing market over the last year or so, and suddenly that traffic light is just flashing yellow constantly.
Yep. Just endless caution.
And you were sitting there on the sidelines, waiting for the elusive right time to buy. And doing nothing starts to feel like the only safe option, because the landscape has just been entirely paralyzing.
It really is sideline purgatory. Because you want to move forward, you might even actually need to move forward because of, well, life events.
Kids, new jobs, whatever.
Exactly. But the conditions just feel so overwhelmingly stagnant that you freeze.
And that paralysis is exactly why we're focusing on our sources today. The mission for this deep dive is to look at a highly relevant, incredibly concise new briefing we've been analyzing.
And it's a really interesting one.
It really is. It's titled Spring Real Estate, The Return of Purchasing Power. And we are going to extract the core insights from this document to figure out if this spring has quietly, almost invisibly, created a window of opportunity that simply did not exist for you last year.
Yeah, because it challenges the dominant narrative we hear every single day.
The doom and gloom.
Right. The general feeling out there at water coolers and dinner tables is that nothing has changed, right? That the market is hopelessly stuck.
Yeah.
But this source, however, brings data arguing that the ground is actually shifting right beneath our feet, just not in the way people expect.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the first thing the briefing points out is the hidden catalyst driving this entire shift. It's not some dramatic housing market crash.
No, not at all.
We aren't looking at a certain influx of millions of cheap, foreclosed homes. It is a subtle, almost completely overlooked change in interest rates.
Yeah, the source provides a very specific numerical comparison here. It points out that last spring, mortgage rates were hovering aggressively around 6.8%.
Which hurts.
It does. But fast forward to right now, and those rates have eased closer to 6.2%.
So I want to pause on those numbers for a second. To the average person who isn't, staring at Bloomberg terminals all day, a drop from 6.8% to 6.2% sounds like a rounding error.
Oh.
It's a 0.6% difference. That doesn't sound like the kind of financial earthquake that should make you get off the sidelines and call a realtor.
Right, it sounds tiny.
But we really need to understand the mechanics of financial leverage here. Think about buying a house like carrying a heavy backpack up a mountain.
Okay, I like where this is going.
So the house is the gear inside the backpack, and the interest rate is gravity.
That's a great way to look at it.
If the interest rate drops even slightly from 6.8 to 6.2, you don't necessarily feel lighter.
Right.
Instead, what happens is you can suddenly pack way more gear, like thousands of dollars more in-house, into that backpack. And the physical effort it takes for your legs to climb that mountain remains exactly the same.
Yes. The strain on your muscles doesn't change.
Exactly. Your monthly payment doesn't change at all,
Yeah.
even though you are carrying a much heavier asset.
What's fascinating here is the underlying math of a 30-year mortgage that makes that gravity metaphor actually work.
Yeah, break that down.
Well, we have to look at how a loan is structured. When you take out a 30-year fixed mortgage, the interest is heavily front-loaded.
Always.
So imagine your monthly payment as a pie chart. In the first few years, the vast majority of that pie goes straight to the bank to pay the interest.
To get their cut.
Oh, the bank always makes sure they get paid first. A tiny little sliver actually goes toward the principal, meaning paying off the house itself.
Right.
But when the interest rate drops from 6.8% to 6.2%, the interest slice of your monthly pie chart shrinks.
Wow, okay.
And since your overall monthly payment stays the same size, that newly freed up space in the pie chart immediately goes to the principal.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, it means every single month, a larger portion of your fixed budget can be applied to the actual value of the home. You are financing a significantly larger loan amount without increasing your out-of-pocket monthly cost.
And the briefing adds a really crucial piece of context here regarding the other side of the equation.
The home prices.
Exactly, the home prices.
Yeah.
Because a rate drop doesn't help if the house itself suddenly costs 20% more.
Right, that would wipe out the advantage entirely.
But the source emphasizes that home prices, in many areas, haven't made a significant jump over this same 12-month period.
Yeah, we are looking at relatively stable pricing right now.
So the cost of borrowing the money has gotten cheaper, while the cost of the asset has essentially stayed flat.
Exactly.
And that invisible percentage drop translates into massive real-world numbers. The briefing actually breaks this down into 3 specific financial tiers based on what they call a buyer's comfort zone.
And that phrase, comfort zone, is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this analysis.
It really is.
It's the absolute anchor of the entire concept.
So let's run the numbers the source provides. For the first tier, the text says that if your comfort zone for a housing payment is around $2,500 per month,
Yeah.
this subtle rate drop means you could now be looking at roughly $31,000 more in buying power compared to last spring.
$31,000. That is just purchasing power materialized out of thin air, just from a fractional drop in the interest rate?
Look, my cynical side is flashing a massive warning light right now.
I get that.
I just have to push back on this narrative for a second. Whenever the real estate industry starts tossing around phrases like, more buying power,
Yeah, it sounds like a trap.
my immediate translation is, oh, they found a new way to convince you to take out a bigger loan and owe the bank more money.
Sure.
Are we just looking at a shiny new marketing spin to get buyers to over-leverage themselves and stretch their budgets to the breaking point?
It is a totally valid suspicion. I mean, the industry has a history of doing exactly that.
Right.
But the mechanics we are talking about today are fundamentally different. You aren't stretching your budget because your monthly obligation does not increase.
Okay.
You aren't being asked to spend $2,600 or $2,700 a month to access that extra $31,000. You are still spending your exact comfort zone limit of $2,500.
So the risk profile for the buyer really hasn't changed.
Not locally, no, not on a monthly basis. The magic of this briefing's data is about reallocation.
Reallocation.
Right. You are legally borrowing $31,000 more for the exact same monthly cost because the math has simply reallocated money from the bank's profit margin back into your pocket,
Wow.
or rather into the equity of your new home,
So the boundaries stay rigid.
which is incredibly important for buyer psychology because buying a home is an intensely emotional process.
Definitely.
And financial boundaries are usually rigid for a very good reason. People know what they can afford to lose from their checking account every 30 days without losing sleep.
Right. Nobody wants to be house poor.
Exactly. So keeping a buyer within their established, safe financial boundaries while simultaneously unlocking tens of thousands of dollars, that is the ultimate aha moment.
You aren't violating your own financial rules. The mathematical rules of the game have just shifted in your favor.
Perfectly said.
Let's scale this up to the next tier the source provides, because the math gets even more dramatic.
Let's hear it.
If your monthly comfort zone is $3,500, that buying power jumps to about $44,000 more.
Wow.
And at the third tier, a $4,500 per month comfort zone, you were gaining close to $57,000 more in purchasing power compared to last spring.
We are talking about approaching $60,000 in newfound leverage, all while protecting the monthly budget.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because $57,000 is just an abstract number on a spreadsheet.
It doesn't mean anything.
Exactly. It doesn't mean anything until you apply it to physical reality. Like, what does an extra $40,000 or $50,000 actually buy you?
The briefing gives some very specific examples of how this transforms the physical reality of house hunting.
What kind of examples?
Well, the source details tangible upgrades. It means having the capital to push your search into a slightly better neighborhood with better school districts.
Ooh.
Or it means getting that crucial fourth bedroom. Or maybe finally securing a dedicated quiet home office instead of, trying to run Zoom meetings from the corner of the kitchen table.
Yeah. Or, and this is a specific point that really resonated with me when reviewing the text, it means finally finding a property that actually checks all the boxes instead of settling.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this entire shift is about transforming the psychological trauma of the modern home buying journey.
Trauma is the right word.
It is. To understand why this is such a big deal, we have to look at what buyers have been dealing with for the last couple of years. It has been a constant state of compromise.
Yes. You walk into an open house, and before you even reach the kitchen, you start rationalizing what you can live without.
Right. You start bargaining with yourself.
You tell yourself, well, I guess the kids can share a room for a few years.
Yep.
Or I suppose we don't really need a backyard. There's a park 4 blocks away.
Hmm.
Or the worst one, we can deal with an hour-long commute. We'll just listen to more audiobooks.
It's the trauma of settling for less while spending more.
Yeah.
Making the biggest financial commitment of your life and feeling like you are losing the negotiation with reality. But injecting $40,000 or $50,000 of invisible buying power into the equation, that bridges the gap between the house you are forced to settle for and the house you actually want.
The dream house.
Right. It is the difference between a house that needs a completely gutted kitchen and one that is entirely move-in ready.
Okay, so an extra $50,000 sounds amazing on paper.
Yeah.
It bridges the compromise gap. But paper doesn't put a roof over your head.
No, it does not.
Having more purchasing power is entirely useless if there are literally no houses available to buy.
That's the catch.
Right, if the grocery store shelves are empty, it doesn't matter how much money you have in your wallet.
Yeah.
So what is the source actually saying about the physical inventory out there right now?
Inventory has been the other half of the real estate nightmare.
Oh, big time.
For the last few years, the market has been frozen by what economists call the lock-in effect or the golden handcuffs.
The golden handcuffs.
Yeah. Millions of people refinanced their homes in 2020 and 2021 at historically low rates, 2.5%, 3%.
And nobody in their right mind wants to give up a 3% mortgage just to turn around and buy a new house at a 7% rate.
Exactly.
So nobody sells. The inventory dries up.
Precisely. People outgrew their homes. They had more kids, they changed jobs, but they stayed put because the math of moving was too punitive.
It just didn't make sense.
But the briefing points out a major critical shift happening right now. It notes that inventory is finally improving in many markets. The ice is cracking.
That is so good to hear.
Yeah, life events are finally forcing people to move, and with rates easing down to that 6.2% mark, the penalty for giving up those golden handcuffs doesn't feel quite as devastating to sellers.
So houses are finally coming onto the market. Buyers have more choices.
Yes.
But the source takes it a step further. It specifically mentions that buyers now have a, quote, higher likelihood of negotiating concessions from sellers compared to the ultra-competitive conditions we saw previously.
And this is where the power dynamic of the entire industry shifts.
Okay, before we get into the psychology of that, I need to interrupt and get some clarity on a technical term here.
Sure.
The source mentions sellers offering concessions, like paying for repairs or buying down the buyer's interest rate. Wait, hold up. A seller buying down my rate.
Yeah, a rate buy down.
How does the person selling me the house change the math on my personal loan with my bank? That sounds like financial dark magic.
I mean, it does sound like magic, but it is a very real, very powerful negotiating tool called a rate buy down.
Okay, how does it work?
Basically, a seller agrees to take a portion of their profit from the sale of the house and give it directly to your lender at closing.
Really?
Yeah. They are essentially prepaying a chunk of your interest up front.
Oh, wow.
In exchange, your bank permanently lowers your interest rate for the life of the loan. The seller gets to sell their house, and you get an even lower monthly payment without having to bring extra cash to the closing table.
That is brilliant.
It is.
But that requires a seller who is actually willing to negotiate.
Right.
So does the return of these seller concessions mean the era of the desperate buyer is finally over? Like, are we officially done with the days of waiving every single home inspection,
Oh, that was the worst.
bidding $50,000 over the asking price, and basically writing a heartfelt letter begging a seller to pick your family?
This raises an important question about market memory versus market reality.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, buyers carried the trauma of those ultra-competitive pandemic conditions with them.
Sure.
Even if the market shifted yesterday, today's buyer still walks into an open house with the deeply defensive mindset of 2022. They expect a brutal bidding war.
Right.
They expect to have to waive their right to an inspection just to have their offer looked at. It is muscle memory. You just expect the seller to hold all the cards.
You expect to be rejected.
Yes. But what this briefing is urgently telling us is that buyers need to update their mindset to match the current data. More inventory means the seller is no longer the undisputed king of the hill. If a seller has a house sitting on the market for 3 weeks instead of 3 hours, suddenly their anxiety goes up.
They start sweating a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They are willing to talk. That is what creates the environment for a concession.
Wow.
It's the seller realizing they need to incentivize the transaction by saying, okay, we will pay for your closing costs, or we will fix the roof before you move in.
That kind of negotiating power simply did not exist a year ago.
Not at all.
If you asked a seller to fix a leaky pipe last spring, they would have laughed you out of the driveway and sold the house to the backup cash offer waiting behind you.
Totally. The power dynamic is migrating back toward the center now.
That's reassuring.
It is. I mean, it might not be a total, undeniable buyer's market in every single zip code across the country, but the chokehold of the absolute seller's market has significantly loosened.
Right.
Buyers are regaining their status as rational consumers who can actually negotiate.
So what does this all mean? If we synthesize everything we've just unpacked from this briefing, we are looking at three distinct pillars that are holding up this entirely new reality for anyone looking to buy a home.
Yeah, let's recap those. Pillar 1 is increased buying power.
Right.
This is driven by the mechanics of that subtle drop in interest rates reallocating your monthly payment, combined with prices remaining relatively stable.
And pillar 2 is more available homes. The golden handcuffs are loosening, inventory is flowing again, meaning you aren't fighting 50 other desperate people for the exact same cramped, outdated bungalow.
Right, and pillar 3 is the return of better negotiating conditions.
Leverage.
Leverage, exactly. You have the leverage to ask for repairs, closing costs, or rate buydowns without the fear of your offer being immediately thrown in the trash.
The text is very clear on the conclusion here.
Mm-hmm.
When you combine those three elements, more power, more homes, more leverage, you end up with a specific window of opportunity that simply wasn't there last year.
It wasn't.
If you have been sitting on the sidelines in that purgatory we talked about, waiting for the math to finally make sense, the numbers strongly suggest that this spring is the time to get off the bench and take another look.
It really is a rare convergence of factors that quietly alters the landscape in favor of the buyer.
Yeah.
And it does so without setting off alarm bells in the broader public consciousness.
But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building entirely on what this source just laid out. The text specifically calls this a window of opportunity.
Right.
And the fundamental thing about windows is they eventually close.
And in real estate, they can slam shut overnight.
So the question you have to ask yourself is this. If the real estate market is defined by these ever-shifting reactive conditions, how long does a window like this typically stay open?
That is the million-dollar question.
Think about it. If rates drop even further, say down to 5.5%, and it becomes front-page news on every website and newspaper in the country, what happens? All those millions of other buyers who are still sitting on the sidelines waiting for a giant neon sign, they're going to flood back into the market all at once.
Oh, instantly.
Demand will absolutely skyrocket. Prices will get pushed up by the sheer volume of buyers. Bidding wars will return. And this specific, quiet opportunity to use stable prices and lower rates to your advantage will completely vanish.
It is the great paradox of the market. The moment an opportunity becomes obvious to absolutely everyone, it ceases to be an opportunity.
Exactly.
It just becomes the new, highly competitive normal.
Remember that flashing yellow traffic light we talked about at the very beginning? The one keeping you paralyzed at the intersection, unsure if you should hit the gas or hit the brakes.
Yeah.
What this deep dive is telling us is that if you look closely at the underlying math, that light might have just quietly turned green. The intersection is clear right now. You have the purchasing power and you have the leverage. But you never really know how long it's going to stay that way before the cross traffic comes rushing back in.
You really don't.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We highly encourage you to take a second look at your own numbers this spring. Sit down, run the math for your personal comfort zone, and see exactly what that invisible lever of interest rates might be able to unlock for you. Until next time.